Hi, welcome, Chris. Thank you so much for being here for the Words of Wisdom series. And you're the third speaker, and I'm just so honored to have you as a guest today. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. Um, I'm excited to share my story.
Yes. All right. So let me just introduce you a little bit, give some background, and then we'll have time for your story, and then we'll have some questions towards the end. So, just going to put some glasses on here. Christopher Anderson is a person who stutters. He has spent over 30 years studying the complexities of his stuttering and journey to self acceptance. This fall, he self published his first book titled Every Waking Moment, the journey to take back my life from the trauma and stigma of stuttering, which chronicles his through life experience of stuttering and how he learned to live collaboratively with his stutter. He also serves as a subject matter expert on national security for the US government in Washington, D.C., where he lives with his wife and 3-year-old son who also stutters. And for more information, you can see the everywakingmoment.blog. And I know Chris from a really cool experience we had recently for speech therapist and some continuing education unit trainings. And we met, I guess, a total of 6 hours over 3 different nights to really get in depth with his book, which was just so beneficial to all the speech therapists there. So much to learn. So, welcome, Chris. I'm going to throw it over to you and you can begin to share your story with us.
Yeah, I don't know where to begin, but I've
Begin at the
been
beginning.
I've been a person who stutters since I was about 5 years old, um, probably around like preschool ish, and I have a lot of memories of it. I remember a lot of the experiences I had, and in school, I had I had speech therapy, and then I had it outside of school. I went to a variety of SLPs and kind of clinical uh, speech therapy. Um, and what I remember about it is that it was more an internal struggle for me because I blocked a lot. I had hard, long blocks, and it seemed like that was the case almost from the start. And um, you know, as a young kid, you don't really have the emotional capacity to understand how to work through that. And as I was in therapy, I wasn't always cooperative, because like I mastered the fluency shaping skills like after a few years, and then I was the one who was helping helping to teach the graduate SLPs. But then I never used them outside of all the therapy I had. And one experience that that I read about in the book is when I was about 13 years old. Um, you know, I'd been in therapy for probably 7 years by then, and it wasn't helping at all. Um, I had uh, a lot of anxiety. I wasn't working on my speech enough outside of therapy from the the reminders that I often would get from my parents. Um, and I knew I was struggling a lot. I I was kind of already turned inward at that point. And when I was 13, my parents found um, an intensive fluency clinic um, about an hour away from my house at a local college. And it was a month long, and I had to stay on campus as a 13-year-old to work on my speech all day long. And it's it's an experience that kind of shaped a lot of who I became as a person who stutters, but also like who I was as a person. Like I had to like grow up really fast at a young age and like learn how to live on my own, handle the emotions of struggling with the therapy at that time. And it created this like experience of like uncertainty about, how the heck am I ever gonna make it in life if I keep struggling stutter as much as I was. It was a very hopeless experience. And after that, I had more fluency shaping speech therapy all through high school. And then when I went to college, it uh, I had enough of it. And I think for the school age years, the hardest part was um, I was alone, and I had a lot of anger because I really couldn't express myself or like how I felt. Um, and it really impacted, um, as the name of the book is, every waking moment of my life. Like, it's all I thought about. And it's a very small, isolating experience. And as I left home to go to college, I was really in a real bad place. And I struggled a lot in college. It's kind of one of those experiences that I wish I could do over again. Um, I I was a loner. I didn't really have a lot of friends in school outside of my roommates, and um, I was in the library like all the time, hiding from all the social activities, and I just felt trapped. Um, and it's it's hard to really know how I made it through that time, but as I've spent years trying to make sense of my story, um, at that point was when I kind of began to see the light a little bit, like how stuck I was, and how I accepted um, like relationships and experiences that I wouldn't even consider at this point in my life. And I feel like that's a huge um, kind of idea that like I started to realize that it really wasn't about my speech. It was about my identity as a person and as a person who stutters. And in college, um, while they were smaller steps, I started to make a little progress in um, facing my fears. Like uh, I worked up to class presentations by the time I graduated. Um, I started by using an automated voice to speak for me as part of my PowerPoints as like how I started. Um, and then I worked up to like actually being behind a podium and then giving the actual presentation. And while I was struggling in every other aspect of my college experience, I was taking ever so slight steps um, to kind of take back my life. Um, and another part of the experience that was also happening at the same time was I was in a relationship that I never really wanted. Like there are a lot of things that happened in it that, as I said, like I wouldn't accept at the moment. But like when you live with stuttering, it's every part of your identity, and it makes you feel as though like you have to make up for it and you have to accept things that you know aren't right, or you're treated a certain way and you just accept it because you feel like, how am I going to meet somebody else? And um, and you think about that all the time. And that's how I was like, well, I guess I'll just accept, this relationship because it's all I could get. And I'm laughing about it now because I'm on the other side of it. But you fast forward a few years in my story, and um, I proposed to and married this person. And as I walked down the aisle, I was drunk as I have ever been, um, because I knew it was not something I wanted. And you know, people who don't stutter hear that part of my story, and they don't. really understand the significance of that. Like you resign yourself to what the experience is, and you take what you can get from life. And it's hard to accept that, but I've spent years working through that and understanding how that existence is not something that I would want for anyone to experience. It's like you're you're facing something and you feel like you don't have any way out, and that's almost the experience of every part of your life. That uncertainty I talked about is like, how can I get some momentum here to to finally face my fears and um, figure out how to accept myself as a person who stutters. And eventually, there's a moment in my life where it all falls apart. And um, there's a series of events where um, I start to see the light, and I start to take even even bigger steps in the right direction. And you know, I get divorced. I lose my grandpa all of a sudden, and um, I kind of miss an opportunity for a dream job, all in the span of maybe 6 months. And at that point, it was like, I got to do something about this. And like, it was, I have to face my stuttering. And um, for some reason, I looked up a local NSA chapter, and I went. And um, I met the people there, and I happened to be stuttering a lot. And the chapter leader, um, he handed me a business card for his speech therapist. And I was like, I think I've had enough therapy at this point, I'm okay. But I took the card, and, you know, probably almost a year after that was the point where I realized, I was like, all right, I'm an adult. I need help. I have this business card, and I reached out. And from there, my whole life just continued to change. Um, I'll end there. Uh, that way, I leave some kind of all the parts of the healing process for the questions.
Okay. I was going to say, wait, you can't leave us there. Hold on a second. We want to know what happened after that. Um, Let me just bring this. Back to both of us. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing so far all of this really personal information too. I love how you explained the process in college, how you started to step back into speaking in front of the class. And I think even for lots of people, people who stutter watching this, or parents of kids, or even speech therapists, to see it's a process. And I don't know if you were guided through that or you just figured that out on your own, but it's like you had a little hierarchy there that you created. Did you create that, or was there help for that? This is just a random off the top of my head question.
Well, I'll give you kind of more context for that. When I started that, those were the first presentations I ever had done in any class until that point.
Huge.
And while that was happening, I was interviewing for jobs, and the way it worked was all the interviews were on campus. All the places would come to school, and we signed up for the interviews, and I was like striking out on like every single one. And it was bad, like it was really bad, like.
Hmm.
And at one point, um, while I was in the classes where I was doing the presentations, I got an interview with the FBI, but it was on the phone. And like presentations, I did not talk on the phone. I could
Hmm.
not. And it like really threw me, because that's like a dream job. Like in
Hmm.
college, getting an opportunity to get my dream job.
Yeah.
And so when I went to do the phone interview, I was really like beyond like myself. Like I was anxious. I was like, how the heck am I ever going to do this? And I broke. Um, I took like a handful of shots of vodka in my dorm room, and I was like, all right, this has got to help me get through this.
Hmm.
And it was like an out of body experience. But it
Hmm.
was like an hour call, and I struggled more than I have ever struggled in all the interviews that I was doing at that point. And at the end of the interview, um, I kind of blacked out,
Hmm.
and I had been walking around my room, and I was like exhausted at that point and like really struggling. And when the interview ended, I like woke up in a chair, like thanking them for the interview. And I was like crushed because like I
Hmm.
knew there was no way I was going to get the job. And I cried and I cried, and I was like, this really sucks. Like this is
Yeah.
probably the lowest moment in my life. But at the same time, I'm really pushing myself in my classes. Like I used to think about how I would ever raise my hand and participate. And I couldn't even think about that. Like the anxiety, the kind of swirling in my head about like, I want to do this, but like, how do I start? And in the very first presentation like that I spoke, um, I I was at a podium and you know I don't remember exactly what I said because like just the whole experience just like kind of made me shut down and like while I was speaking I was not really there and when I sat down I just remember the emotions and the stress of the moment just kind of just like releases in class and like I've always had this awareness of like the toll that struggling through stuttering had on me. Like I knew it as a kid, like all through the therapy, like how exhausting it was and how it impacted my sleep and all of that. And I knew at some point I would have to work through that. And um, that's kind of the journey I've been on ever since that point in my life.
Can you share a little bit more about when you said the toll on you and all of that, right? Because I remember, I mean, even some of the details from the book, which was great, but even beyond the exhaustion, right? I mean, you experienced a lot
Mm-hmm.
of impact. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you think through like a moment of stuttering, you have like the whole spectrum of a traumatic experience. Like the anticipation in advance of like knowing that you're gonna have to talk and struggle, like you know that you're gonna struggle in advance, and that feeling is like kind of just takes over you, like um, it's all you can think about, regardless of the situation or the context. And then when I'm in the middle of like a block or struggle, like I don't really know what's happening around me. Like I have this like, and you probably see it in the video, like my eyes like kind of like go blank, and like that's a learned reaction to the feeling of stress. Like the stress of the moment just overwhelms me, and I've had to work really hard to stay in the moment and not kind of allow the reactivity of my body to like take over. Because after you learn to speak that way or like interact with people while struggling like all throughout your life, it's just a natural reaction that you don't have a choice in the matter of how you handle a moment of stuttering. And like there are times when like it's easy and I work through the stuttering, and I have my full awareness, and I'm able to process like what I want to say and have all my thoughts kind of make sense while paying attention to like whatever my audience is. But other times, like I struggle so much that, I lose my train of thought, or I
Mhm.
don't have my thoughts all together. And it's really frustrating, um, to have to live like that. But um, it's what you have to work on.
Mhm.
And then um, depending on like the amount of struggle, or kind of the impact it's had on you in the moment, like you're exhausted afterwards. And there are times like that I have like a presentation, or I have to make a phone call, or I have a stressful situation in which I have to speak. Um, After I work through it, I'm all done for the day. Like I can't focus. Like my adrenaline is like off the charts. Um, I'm exhausted, and I just I don't want to talk to anybody. Like I just want to move on. But like the whole part of the stuttering experience that like really has an impact on people is that you don't really ever get a break. Like you don't have the space to process all the moments of struggle. Like you just have to
Mm.
move on to the next
Mhm.
one and the next one and the next one, and they just keep piling up. And
Mhm.
that kind of accumulation of traumatic moments kind of make you who you are. Like
Mm.
you're always aware of your environment. You're looking to see if people are gonna talk to you or ask you a question. You're on edge for the phone to ring. You're scanning ahead to see like an interaction that you always struggle with, um, and that's all you think about. And I feel like um, a focus on speech is like something that um, I never really needed. Excuse me. But I
Mhm.
always had an understanding that like I had to work through what was happening inside. Um,
Mm.
and when I finally had the opportunity to do that as an adult, I really embraced it. Um,
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, we're going to hear more about that. And it definitely sounds like a hypervigilant brain trained to protect itself, which
mhm,
is a really normal response to really the degree of trauma that you're experiencing.
mhm,
And not everybody um, understands or views or looks at stuttering as trauma. And so that's a little bit of a newer understanding that's going on. Not every experience with stuttering is traumatic for everyone, right? Different people will experience it to different degrees and situations change. I'm sure some of yours were more or less traumatic as well. But I just want to clarify too, before we move on to once you, as an adult in your own autonomy, said, like, I want help. This is the time I'm choosing this. And what happened at that point. Let's just go back for a second to blacking out, because I just want people to understand that piece too, whether they've experienced it themselves as someone who stutters and is like, oh man, this is the first person I've heard who said this. Or somebody else is thinking they drank too much and they blacked out. Is that what he's talking about? Because you all actually were drinking too. But I know you use the word blacking out related to trauma, right? Versus like a drinking blackout. So just explain that a little bit more so everyone understands what's
Yeah.
happening, what you mean. Yeah.
Um, it's when your body is really overwhelmed, and it's after like repetitive experiences of like really high stress, anxiety, um, and like an inability to kind of handle the emotions of a moment. Your body learns how to protect you so you don't have to experience being overwhelmed um, to a significant degree. And it's called dissociation. It's a long-standing psychological experience. And while there's probably a range of like, of how I experience it, like there are smaller moments where like it happens really faster than I realize it. And there are other times when, for example, uh, I gave the best man's speech at my brother's wedding a few years ago. And I wasn't really nervous leading up to it because, like, a lot of people at the wedding, already understood that I stuttered. And I had been on the acceptance journey for years at that point. So I don't really care how people react to my stuttering anymore. But in the moment, I'm up there, I'm holding the microphone, I'm holding the speech in the other hand, and I can't see anything. Like I can't see the whole crowd of people and like the lights and the cameras and all that stuff. And like I'm struggling a lot, and I can't like get a flow of my words going, and it's rough. And like I had experienced moments like that in the past, and when you feel that way and it feels like experiences that you've had, your mind and your body just kind of take over.
Yeah.
And um, eventually, when that happened, you know, I was like in and out. Like I had to be present enough to read from the script, but at the same time, like I don't remember a lot of it until I was hugging my brother. And it's almost like it just takes you away from the struggle and the stress of the moment, and it allows you to wake up uh, after it's over.
Mm.
Um, and I've met a lot of people who stutter who've explained that experience, but they haven't really thought about it because they thought they were the only ones experiencing that. And while a lot of people may not interpret experience of stuttering as a trauma or traumatic, how you learn how to stutter is a behavioral response,
Mm.
how you feel as a child. Um, you learn how to stutter as a child, and you hold on to that all throughout your life. And those responses are like your habits and how you respond to stuttering. And I still have some that I remember as a kid, and that strong of a response to like take over when you're that overwhelmed, like that is um, like adaptation to the stress, like long-term stress on your body. And if you're not into trauma, that's fine. But like the experience of stress and the anxiety shapes how you develop, um, like
Yes.
every part of you. Um, and I feel like it's important to approach it that way and not always um, like all in on how your speech sounds. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think you're really highlighting the importance of this awareness for parents, for people who stutter, to be like, oh my gosh, that's what's going on in speech therapists too, right? Of course, that's where we connected, but just to be trauma informed and understand this aspect of stuttering to see if that is a piece of what's going on for those you're working with is really imperative.
Mhm.
Let's talk about healing. I love that you used that word, and maybe even define what that means for you and how did your healing journey begin. We kind of left off where you reached out for speech therapy. I don't know, maybe what the big pieces of this were. This part is so important. um I know I feel like I'm asking you to summarize again, but I'll interject more questions too as we go along, but you're doing so well just sharing your story. So
Yeah.
yeah, tell us what
Um,
healing. Let's start with that.
yeah. The part about the story that I left out is that I met my now wife um, not long after I came out of all the rock bottom experiences,
Mm.
and she is like really outgoing, and I was not. But I liked her a lot. We really hit it off um, from the moment we met, and she pushed me outside of my comfort zone like from the very second that we met, and I couldn't keep up. Like I was like I had to like really push myself in all the experiences I had with her, and I wasn't. doing okay with it. And it was all social situations, like, you know, out with her friends, alone with her, a lot more than I was used to. And that I wanted to hold on to her, and I didn't want to lose her. And so I finally called the therapist on the business card, and it ended up being avoidance reduction therapy, and I
Wait,
never
can I
had.
interrupt you? Can I just interrupt and back up a tiny bit because I feel like that part where you started to date on your own, like you
Mhm.
did some other stuff on your own even before you got here, right? Before you met your now wife, like
Yeah,
you were
yeah,
doing some pretty inspiring things on your own to get to the point where that even I feel like was a possibility. I
yeah,
think somehow we skipped a little bit of that hierarchy that you created back in college, having it speak for you and then finally behind the podium, like those steps. But you did that again here, again, without not in therapy, somehow doing this on your own.
yeah. And I think if I had more time, I'd walk through every part of that. But I think
Yeah.
what what is important, is that I was starting to understand my story, like everything that I had been through up until that point, and I had used online dating to kind of help me pull my story together and learn how to talk to people. Um, I went on a bunch of first dates, and I told the story of my life. Um, and each time I understood it a lot more. I included, all the bad stuff and all the regrets and all that stuff. And eventually I had a story of my life. And it was, if you ever meet somebody for the first time and you're on a date and it's like, you start talking and you're like, what the heck am I going to say? And it's like really stressful. But like with stuttering, it's like, before all of that, it's like, how do I do small talk? Like, how do I go back and forth with somebody and not s- struggle so much? And I really got a lot out of that. And it helped me kind of put the pieces of my story together. And eventually, I was always the more talkative one on the dates.
Look at
And
that.
I attribute my ability to hold on to my wife with my story, um, and
Mm,
being able to explain like how resilient I was, or like,
mm,
even all the hard moments, like understanding how to share those with other people, because like, you know no one wants to date uh, a divorced person. Like, it's a thing, like, and I checked the box on the online dating, and like, it was always me being the proactive one who had to reach out to people versus like, it's just those small things that are part of your identity that you have to learn to accept. And like, when we talk about acceptance for stuttering, like, there isn't a roadmap, but there is the identity of who you are that you have a chance to work through and understand, like having an ability to express the emotions and the moments of your life that made you who you are, like that is a skill that is kind of underappreciated in a in a therapeutic journey. Um, and I know that you want me to hit on uh, all the Iron Man stuff, but I feel like that is more important to kind of how I was able to work through the initial parts of healing.
Mm,
That whole identity thing, like that helped me arrive at the place where I was ready for change. Like
mhm,
I was ready to restart in therapy as an adult because I had something to live for. Like I had something
mm,
to work towards, like that I really wanted to maintain, and that was a relationship that I wanted, that I really wanted.
mm.
Um, and so I started therapy, and I get there and completely humbled by by it all because it was not a focus on my speech or how it sounded, and it was um, everything I needed.
And
Um,
what was that?
like,
And I'm
yeah,
gonna
it's
say,
like work on the on the on the cognitive aspects of
mm,
of stuttering and really the behavioral reactivity. You know how you respond in the moment when you stutter is like what you have to work on. Like you have to
mm,
understand like how you stutter, um, how you think about stuttering, how you explain the feelings that you feel in the moment and the emotions and the thoughts and all of that. Um, I learned how to do that at the outset of therapy. And, you know, the first things I worked on was eye contact, um, paying attention to how I stuttered, like, you know, all the extra nonsense that I do, the hand movements, the uh, I used to do a head jerk, um,
mhm,
my nostrils, they flared, all those things that I never understood before, like
mm,
were called out and I had to pay attention to them. And you start to like s- strip them away and you get to kind of feel how you really stutter. And um, it was really enlightening for me. And as all that's happening, like um, you kind of learn what you're avoiding in your life. Like,
mm,
what are you afraid of in terms of like what you don't? want to do, like where you stutter more. Um, like as you said, like I ranked all the situations I feared, like from using the phone to um, saying thank you to people um, all throughout my days, ordering things in the grocery store at the meat counter or um, with my family. You know, all the situations that occurred all throughout my life that I was afraid of, that you kind of have this reactivity to. Um, I worked on, and it was exactly what I needed. And the thing about it is that I never really worked on my stuttering in therapy for like a year. Like it was all just like kind of the cognitive and behavioral aspects of it. Um, and it was really what I needed. Um, and eventually, um, I got to work on openly stuttering and, stuttering on purpose, to kind of help decrease my reactivity to it. Um, and that was extremely hard. Um, but I had a lot of opportunities in my life, whether that be like in my personal life or, you know, a lot at work. Um, I had more than I can handle at times. And that, you know, the idea of the process of change is you have to get in the reps. Like you have to experience like how you feel in the moments. Um, and like that was what I never experienced in therapy before, is that, you know, I never really tried and failed. Um, it was always just the avoiding and the hiding and the, you know, in the minute I start to struggle, that's it. I'm not going to try anymore. But with um, avoidance reduction therapy, um, it was a lot easier to work up to my fears, um, and understand that I just had to show up at first and work up from there. Um, and I spent about two, 2.5 years in therapy, and I felt like that was enough for me to kind of work at it on my own.
Yes. Um, and you're sharing a lot of pieces of the therapy process, which is great. And we don't have to go through all of them because there's so much to therapy. Um, but that process didn't end there, right? So when you talk about your healing, it actually extended beyond that. So that's kind of the therapy portion of it. Is that fair to say? And then I love how you've shared about this being a longer process and almost like stages of it. You don't have to get into all that detail too, but um, I would love to for you to be able to share about the length of time even that this change is occurring over. Because some people enter therapy, a lot of people enter therapy expecting, like, fix my kid stuttering, or even an adult who stutters, who's 35, like, I'm coming to you, somehow you have the magic pill to fix this, versus this unfolding process that is very unique and different for each person, but hearing yours is part of gaining that wisdom from you. So, I don't know if you want to share a little bit more about healing, the length of time, and I love the idea of arriving at enough, how you, what that's about. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like before I explain that, like I have to say that I don't agree with the whole like everyone has to find their own way
Yeah.
to stuttering. I feel like it makes it as though like you alone have to figure this out, and
Mm,
like that's not how it actually happens.
mm,
Like it is a process that is a process. Like you have to understand that it's going to take a long time. Like I'm still working on things, processing my experience, and a lot of healing is like you go through things and then you process it because that's what the experience of stuttering prevents. Like
mm,
you're so like caught up in like in the struggle and the fear and the anxiety that you don't have the space to process like you know how did I feel or react in that moment, and you know what does that mean, like how does that kind of how do I make sense of that.
mm,
And I feel like you need the time and the reps and the experiences to have that space to reflect. And um, I've been at this over 13 years now, and I didn't get to the point where I felt like, all right, I've had enough. I don't need to focus on this as much until like 8 or 9 years. Like, that's a long time. Like, even if you don't stay in therapy all those years, you have to understand that it's a journey. It really is. And that, like, you don't have to rush it because it, it's really helpful to take the time and understand the story of your experiences. And um, when I left therapy, I had this idea that it was only part of what I needed, um, and I ended
mm,
up leaning on like all the work that I did in my personal life to find somebody that I loved like more than anything in the world. I was at the time learning how to be a triathlete. I was excelling at work. Um, I was opening up more to my family and friends. And then eventually I was writing a book. And each of those parts of my life, it was a process of kind of learning how to exist in each of those spaces. And that, you know, I didn't have to avoid any of those things because I had been afraid of each one of those all my life. Like, there's no way I could be a triathlete because I stutter. Like, how ridiculous is that? Like, like, like it doesn't have anything to do with it, but like you think that way, and it's like, oh, I can't have a relationship in which I'm not wishing I was with somebody else or with somebody who treated me well, or my family. Like, I can't talk about stuttering. Well, of course I can. It's part of who I am. And you
Mm.
know, you 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 take the time that you need to work through all of those things. And I kind of rolled my therapy experience into the momentum I had in each part of my life. And it just slowly changed who I became. Um, and when when everyone talks about acceptance, I really believe that that's what it takes. Like, it's not only speech therapy. Like,
Mm.
it's taking stock of like every part of your life and really understanding what you want out of them, and then you work towards them. You take small steps, you go at your own pace, and you put in the work. Like, literally, you get the reps in. Like, it's, you have to
Mm.
experience things, you have to learn and fail and grow. And that's what I've been doing for years. But eventually you get to a point where you don't have to really try as hard anymore. And it's, all of a sudden you have everything that you want and more, and the choice to really do what you want with your life. But it's years and years and years. Like, it's not like you're going to go to therapy and be like, oh, I found the answer to this and I'm going to be good by next week. Like,
Mm. Mhm.
it's a long journey. Like, there's a reason that that word has been attached to stuttering.
Mm.
uh, yeah.
Um, was there a point, this is what you're making me think, was there a point where your book title, you weren't thinking about stuttering every waking moment in this healing process, where you realized like this has changed, like all of these little stepping out, going for it, it's added up, and I've arrived somewhere or in this place. I've talked to some people where it has and they've shared about that, but just wondering for you, was there a moment where that happened?
um, there isn't a specific moment, but um, it feels as though it happens all at once almost.
Mhm.
um, if I had to put a moment to it, it was in my first Ironman. In the marathon, um, at the end, I kind of had this like spurt of energy, and at that point, I'd been on my feet for over 13 hours, and I was dehydrated, exhausted, and all of that. But like, I just started to think about all the struggle that I went through, and like, um, you know, here I was doing a thing that I never thought I could do, and all of a sudden I started to run even faster, and um, ever since then there really hasn't been a moment in my life that I've avoided, because
Mm.
if I could put myself through all the training that it took to get there and participate in the race, and it was a heck of a race, just like the whole experience. I felt like I could do anything, like, and it didn't have anything to do with stuttering. Like, it was just me existing as who I was. But I will say that I would not have arrived at that moment if I hadn't worked through my stuttering, um, and kind of ace my fears and all of that. It kind of allowed me to um, open up my life enough to know that I could pursue things that I wanted to do, and like I chose really hard things because I wanted to struggle in something that like I chose to do, and not every time
Mm.
I opened my mouth to speak. And it was that kind of airing of kind of one struggle I chose with a struggle that I never had a choice, and they
Mm.
kind of all came together to allow me to live the life I wanted. Um, and it was kind of my moment. Yeah.
That's a neat way of describing that. It's like the massive struggle of an Ironman. You had agency over that versus where stuttering, right? It can feel so disempowering. Neat. Okay, so there really was a moment. um, I'm gonna just ask you a couple other random questions that might seem a little out of the blue, but I'm wondering what you feel helped you the most as a child who stuttered. What was the most helpful thing? Like, did your parents do anything that was helpful? What, because there was a lot that wasn't, and you walked through a lot very isolated, but what was helpful?
I'll say that my parents had the best intentions with 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 the resources available at the time. Um, I don't hold anything against them. I It's not their fault. Um, but the one thing that you know I explain in the book is that my mom kind of used to disclose my stuttering to a lot of people in front of me, and I used to watch and I used to hear her, or I was aware of it happening. And I feel like at that age, I didn't have the capacity to do that on my own, to be my own advocate. But eventually, I was able, and I knew how. And even if it was to avoid things, it's a skill that you don't all of a sudden learn how to do. And I watched her, and I understood
Mm.
what the intention was, even if it wasn't the right intention. And eventually, um, it made it easier as an adult to learn how to talk about my stuttering with others, um, and to ask for help, to to share it in a way is that like enhances an interaction, like not opting out of things or avoiding things, but like,
Mm.
just learning how to disclose, like that's a skill as well. And it started really early on.
Mm.
I actually wanted to ask you a little bit about that too, disclosure or self-advertising, some people call it, just letting someone know that you stutter. You called it the pitch too. I know some. Um, has your relationship with that changed over time?
Yeah, I don't really have to do that anymore.
Yeah.
But if I need to, I'm not afraid to. But I feel
Mhm.
like at one point or another, it felt like I was doing it too often,
Mm.
and the reactions that I would get would be like, these people, they don't really care at all. Like, I'm the one who cares, and like, I don't need to do this
Mm.
anymore.
Mm.
That's almost like part of the enough stage, is that like no one is thinking about your stuttering. Like, they may have an awkward reaction to it. Very few people ever say anything, you know, out loud. Like, I don't care what they're thinking anymore. But like,
Mm.
you have to experience that moment of like, I don't need to
Mm.
be telling people anymore. Like, you have to, again, to go through the reps of like really explaining your stuttering to people.
Mhm.
Um, but there is a moment where it's like, why am I doing this? Like, it's not helpful anymore.
Mm.
Maybe that's part of the healing definition too, like you're arriving there and enough. It's like you used it to get what you needed out of it, and now
Yeah.
you've just evolved and changed. Um, Back to that regarding being a child, what do you feel would have helped you the most as a child who stuttered?
Well, I'm experiencing that as a father, uh,
Mm,
as a son.
aw.
Uh, I have a son who stutters, and our approach is being informed by the acceptance model. um, he doesn't even know he stutters; like, he just flows. Um, and while I don't know exactly how he'll stutter in the future, like, he's had every single kind of pattern, but he doesn't have a voice in his life trying to tell him how to talk, or that he needs to go to therapy, or the way he talks is wrong. Um, and I
Mm.
think a huge aspect of the early experience is you learn what shame is. And like, shame is like the really the underlying aspect of stuttering that like perpetuates it. And he will never know that from his parents, or really anyone in his like immediate um, circle. And even though like my parents um, weren't like outwardly like, you know, don't talk right, like, you need to fix your stuttering, there was always this um, kind of air of like, if I don't do it now, I'm stutter in the future, and like the pressure to be in therapy, to work on my speech at home, to work on the tools at home, and I push back against all of that. And um, my son will never experience that.
Mm.
So like that's what I would have wanted, but
Yeah.
that wasn't the age of therapy for stuttering in the 90s. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but that's why what I'm doing now, um, is to raise awareness for the new approach.
Yeah. And you're providing for him what you feel you would have benefited from, and or maybe even wish that you had when you were younger,
Mm-hmm.
to prevent a lot of the things that you had to go through.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
He will have like struggle. Like he will struggle. He
Mm-hmm.
will have emotions, but he will have a
Yeah.
way to express them. He will have a way to share them. He will have a home
Mm-hmm.
environment in which, you know, we're helping him heal as he goes and not have to wait
Mm.
until he's an adult. He will have the tools. He will be resilient. He will have a story about who he is as a person who stutters, and like
Mm.
that's the real toolbox that I would want for him or any person who stutters.
Mm.
Yeah, that there's so much resiliency that's built when um, a kid who stutters can come home and have this safe, soft place to land where stuttering is fully accepted and okay. And even if you had a hard time out in the world that day or at school, you got made fun of, right? I mean, whatever happens there, just like you said, there's a place to process it back home. And that builds such resiliency
Yeah,
versus
and
like, hey, let's work on your speech more, and it's like, great, now here's something I can't even express. Yeah.
he hears me stuttering. Um, like the other night, I got hung up on an S, and I just couldn't get on to the next sound. And he he goes, "Daddy, why'd you say zebra?" And like because it was the S like strung out, like he thought I said zebra, but it was nowhere
Yeah.
near that. And it's just like that, like innocence of like he doesn't
Mm.
know like what I'm doing, but
Yeah.
he also doesn't know that he talks almost the exact same way as me. And
Yeah.
it's just like this real interesting experience of like seeing how, you know, at, identity around the experience develops. Um,
Yeah.
it's but I'll tell you like while I understand he won't have the experience I have the other side of the thoughts like in my head still about like knowing how hard it was for me, and
Yeah.
I can't quite accept all of that yet. It's an
Mm.
ongoing process for me.
Sure.
Um, but I understand it as that.
Yeah. Another process for you to walk through.
Yeah.
Yes. Um, I know we're over time, but I just have a few more things I want to ask you because we're talking about some of these topics and about acceptance. And so I'm wondering your thoughts on this. I don't think this was brought up in anything else that I've discussed with you, but um, what do you think would actually help the country or society to become more stutter friendly, stutter accepting, um, or stuttering just being another way of talking? What do you think would help that? And my other question here is going to be, do you feel like others in society need to understand and accept stuttering for you to feel or be free? I think I kind of know how you'll answer that, but I'm just wondering this dynamic between your own journey and how what society is, right? There's big interplay there.
Yeah. Um, I'm kind of an outlier.
Okay.
In response to both of those, um, I don't think, um, at least for me, there should be a focus on how society accepts us or not, accepts our voices.
You do or you
Because
don't?
I don't,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there is still a ton of work to be done inside the
Mm-hmm.
community, like revamping the therapy approaches and kind of the community steering the ship a little faster. Um, and then just all the people who stutter who are alone in the journey still. We haven't
Mm.
reached them enough, and like understood how to help more people, more of our own. We haven't really taken care of our own before we go out to the public to kind of help them understand this uttering experience. At the same time, though, a huge part of acceptance is you have to have a period in which you're an advocate. You're like sharing your story
Mm.
in public to help others understand who you are. Like you have to have that opportunity of sharing with other people. Um, it's part of the process that I think is really overlooked, but there's a strong movement at the moment in the community of like a lot of people are sharing their stories and like being more open, and that's great. Like I'm all for that because I went through that as well. Like
Mm-hmm.
I had a period of that where I was really out in the open, like involved in NSA a lot, and it helped me. Like it was really an important part of the process. But as I kind of work to help in the community in terms of kind of collaborating with SLPs, with researchers, with whoever wants to work together, um, I just am not happy with how slow the change is happening with kind of the approach to stuttering and the uh, kind of the support to SLPs for understanding how to do acceptance based therapy. Like that's an underappreciated part of um, steering the ship is that while people who stutter need support, like SLPs need almost an equal amount of support to learn how to do acceptance approaches. Um, and I feel like there's a lot of like individualized efforts to like um, have like a model or like a new approach to stuttering, but there isn't a lot of like we need to come together and all kind of steer the ship together.
Mm.
And that's kind of what I mean by we haven't spent enough time taking care of our own yet. Like we haven't put in the work to reach more people and to um, help others understand like how to work through acceptance and the journey and the healing and all that stuff. Um, I really feel strongly about that we need to
Mm.
spend more time with our own and not really worry about like how others are responding to us.
Mm.
I've experienced discrimination. Like I've been laughed at. Like I've had all of that, but I I don't like what a focus on that fuels inside of me. Like it just it like fuels and like an anger, like a reactivity that I just don't want in my life anymore. Um,
Mm.
on the other side, though, like having an opportunity to do something like the book club or even the next project that I'm working on, like have involvement in a way that is um, kind of more constructive, and it's bringing people together and um, just more collaboration um, is my approach. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. I'm going to ask you one last question and then let you go because you've been very generous with your time and sharing. So, the last question is just, is there anything that we haven't covered? Did we miss anything that's really important to you that you want to share or get across before we end? I know there's lots of details in the book and everything else, but just in this setting.
I think one part of therapy that will be kind of a game changer for people who stutter and SLPs alike is working together to understand a story of your journey through stuttering, like learning how to write the narrative of your life, like from the
Mm.
beginning all through therapy and into healing. Like when you have an understanding of what you've went through and how it has helped you arrive at where you are now, that is how you you pull together an identity of acceptance. Like you work through the stories of your life to understand them, to see what they meant, to kind of know how they shaped you. Um, and I feel like eventually that's going to be a huge part of speech therapy that is a focus. And the more I think about it, like that's kind of what I experienced in avoidance reduction therapy, you know. And I feel like speech therapy will evolve to a point where it's more of a kind of walking through your life than a I need to work on my speech type experience. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your words of wisdom, so much here. And it was just an honor to have you here and to share your story. So appreciate you. Thank you so much. It's going to help a lot of people.
I appreciate the opportunity.